Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.
The beauty of Lancashire. Well, at least that's the location they say on the Steam page. According to Wikipedia, it was hinted at that the town from Wallace and Gromit was based on Wigan, and as of the 1970s, that's technically located in Greater Manchester. So, the beauty of Manchester, I guess? But nonetheless, it's rather pleasing to finally know where Wallace and Gromit live. The game was written episodically, probably the start of Telltale's foray into that business model, so in a way they kind of added 4 more episodes to the Wallace and Gromit canon. And the game also does this weird thing, something that Telltale's other early series does, their take on Sam & Max, where every episode is treated as a different game in your Steam library for some reason. Each episode has a different wacky premise, and follow each other with minimal reference to the previous episodes. So they're self-contained point-and-click scenarios. So, how's the writing? Well, the dialogue's okay. It's not hilarious, but it has a nice silly gag here and there. And I appreciate all the quirky characters with all their stereotypically villaginess.
Oh, do I? Tell that to Postman. He seemed quite taken with me this morning.
Whoa, I'm pretty sure those T's are supposed to be implied. It's very charming, you know, like Wallace and Gromit in general. Oh when will these two start a sustainable business? The scenarios, in my opinion, are brilliantly creative, and each episode ends in a lovely climax of anarchic action. You start out with some recognizable point-and-click elements, then things go off the deep end. How's the gameplay? Actually, rather simplistic. You have an adventure game inventory, but you can't combine items. So it's more of a use this year affair. Not that hard to figure out, and if you pay attention, logic will light your way. Other than that, now and then some trial and error will be employed. Plenty of times the answers were obvious, but I believe it does get harder in the last 2 episodes. But still, it's quite manageable. It doesn't really have puzzle sections either, except for, say, the really elaborate and unique take on the sliding puzzle, as well as the unique and quite fun word games you play with Mrs. Gabberly. And, oh yeah, a chicken that plays tic-tac-toe. How simple the game was really spurred me on to try and beat it with wits alone, a great many times in spite of the fact that it always went first, and had the brain of the computer. It turns out I already knew the solution to the puzzle, but I failed to connect the dots. I didn't realize you had to employ the answer multiple times, and that's perhaps just more me being stubborn. And visually, the game is kind of great, because it looks just like Wallace and Gromit. Spot on. Sure, there are some deviations. Polygon edges, for instance. And I'm guessing because they rendered it in 3D, the frame skips associated with claymation work are more abrupt. Or perhaps less so? Maybe because the 3D rendering smoothed it all out? So you will notice a marked difference between this and claymation. At first, it really seems like everything was made 3D from scratch, but if the graphical setting is high enough and you look closely, you can make out the odd clay texture. And when you look at the eyes, you see those indents in the pupils. Indents in these shiny baubles they use for eyes. Are these things simply aesthetic touches? Or did they employ claymation from the start, like in Neverhood or The Dream Machine? I don't know, but it looks nice. And Wallace's house looks nice as well. But some other areas don't necessarily match up to this level of quality. And as is usually the case, natural textures have aged the most noticeably. Compared to the house, that grass looks unpleasant. But there's enough here to find beautiful. I mean, claymation is an underutilized art form, so automatically any use thereof gets bonus points from me. You get to be in the world of Wallace and Gromit, one that's easy to recognize as such, and thus a charming one. Gromit walks on 4 legs even though he can stand on 2. So I assume charm was what the game was shooting for. Not only that, nostalgia receptors in your brain go frantic once you hear the iconic theme song. And the game does employ some other whimsical tunes as well. Is that a Yorkshire brass band or something? And sometimes it goes epic. Just listen to this bagpipe tune. But maybe when the tone changes like that, especially towards the more sinister side of things, maybe then the charm is slightly undercut. Maybe sometimes that can feel quite out of place. Charm is probably the main draw of this game after all. But that brings up an important point here. I am quite the Wallace and Gromit fan. The brand speaks to me. It was one of the things on tape we had I watched over and over again when I was quite young. So please remember this when considering whether or not you'll play this game. Ask yourself, how do you feel about cheese? But outside of the Wallace and Gromit fandom, I still argue the game is really nice and compact. Wallace's house in the town center is most of what you see throughout the entire game. Cute and quaint and seemingly only populated by 8 people, 3 dogs, a squirrel, and whatever guest star the episode throws at us. And the physics are cartoony as well. The game does have some technical issues though. It jolts sometimes when transitions are made and when it loads.
I'd best tell Gromit to lay the table.
Unless of course that's a problem on my hardware's end. And also sometimes when people are talking I hear this weird scratchy lisp. I'll play an occasion where I hear this. You decide for yourself whether or not I'm imagining it.
Saying that in a crisis like this, we must act as one, like a well-trained commando unit.
Also, when I start a new episode, I increase the resolution, but then it crashes. Then I start it up again, increase the resolution, and that second attempt succeeds. You may have to do this for each episode like I did. And other than that, at times the game is maybe a touch unrefined. Altogether, the game took me about 12 hours to complete, and it is cheap on Steam. 105 Rand full price, 31 Rand 50 on sale. That's 2 Rand 63 per hour of gameplay, which is quite good. And to install all 4 episodes takes up 2068 megabytes on the hard drive. Not the best download, but not that bad. And you can download them one by one, if spacing out the downloads has any sort of a functional value to you. And it does work on the Warhorse quite well. About as well as it worked on my gaming PC, except with slightly lower graphics. No clay effect, really. I didn't test an action-packed section, but I wouldn't be surprised if that played completely fine, based on what I've already seen. Stereotypically, it's actually quite kid-friendly. I mean, it's Wallace and Gromit. But there may be 1 or 2 things in it that some people won't like. For instance, a message left on Wallace's answering machine refers to Mr. Panier's store as a Quickie Mart, but I believe that's the only mention of it. No signage to indicate that. Maybe I missed it, but otherwise, that's the only occasion I heard it. And also the Ganges grip gag. Because when someone performs the technique, sitar music sometimes plays, and they stick their tongue out and cross their eyes. I suppose you can downgrade it to unobjectionable if you can come up with a non-stereotypic reason to associate sitar music with mysticism. As in a legendary savant who created the Ganges grip, and if you could just chalk up the crossed eyes to eccentricity, otherwise it's probably stylization based upon a stereotype, and not everyone thinks that's enough of a reason to make something okay as a joke and unoffensive. So these 2 things are here, gauge them with your moral compasses. Other than those 2 things, I believe it's squeaky clean and kid-ready. The game has great, lovely visuals, spot-on representation of Wallace and Gromit. Also, it has nice interiors, if some textures, natural ones especially, have aged noticeably. Also, the 3D rendering seems to have smoothed over some of the claymation frame skipping. That's not such a bad thing, but since it's so close to claymation, this sort of detracts from the charm offensive. The game has good music, the iconic theme song especially, but there's a strange tonal seriousness that comes from the sinister music. The scenarios are lovely and wacky, ending in brilliant action-packed climaxes, plus it's unique that it's a game with an episodic structure, but in an unfocused way. It's not one big story sequentially told, just self-contained delights, with minor references to the other episodes, kind of like the average animated TV show. It has all the charm of Wallace and Gromit and delightfully silly writing, if not hilarious writing. More stuff that will make you smile instead of laugh out loud. On the maybe side, it is compact. I find it cool and cute to be located on this single street, for the most part, but others will prefer more sweeping journeys. I find this a bit cramped, and the gameplay is very simplistic. You don't combine items, and there are very few puzzles, but it does have those very fun climax sequences, as well as those unique word puzzles with Mrs. Gabberly. Some people might find this game a bit more straightforward and logical. You do get hints, and as long as you listen to them, you will be fine. Probably. Straightforward. But, quite often, the solutions to the problems are still rather goofy, and I'm slightly hesitant to call any of this that logical. On the con side, the game does have technical issues. Unrefinements. Maybe the scratchy lisp thing, if you heard it too. Also, those noticeably large jolts, as well as the change of resolution crashes. Come on, play it, and stare into the judgmental, glassy eyes of Gromit the Wonder Dog. Like you're so perfect.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.